A lot has been said about the Transformers film franchise over the past 14 years since the original made its debut in theaters. While they helped bring the overall franchise back into the public conscience when its popularity had been waning in the early 2000s, many believed them to be a blight on the brand and a poor representation of the characters so many hold dear. Oftentimes, people debate which film is the worst among them rather than the best. As of the 5 films that Michael Bay directed, the first is usually considered to be the best overall package. While I love the first live-action Transformers film and credit it with selling me on the franchise, I don't actually think it's the best. What's sure to be a controversial stance, my favorite and vote for personal best of the franchise is the 4th outing, 2014's Transformers Age of Extinction. I know to many this sounds like a ludicrous statement, so in this video I'm going to be laying down my reasons for why I favor this film over any of the other blockbuster robot movies that Bay directed during his time at the helm of the franchise. I'm also going to say for posterity that as of now I consider 2018's Bumblebee to be a reboot without any story ties to the Bayverse continuity, so it's not going to be in the running for ranked lists when it comes to the other live-action films. So let's not beat around the bush and dive into why I think this movie is better than most people give it credit for. If you watched my video on Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides a few months ago, then some of these points I'm going to make are going to sound familiar. Now, Age of Extinction is not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination, and I'll get into its many faults as we go, but for now I want to focus on the things it does right. Like Pirates 4, I think it does a lot of things right when it comes to its main plot and its duties as a soft reboot. The film starts off 5 years after Dark of the Moon ended, and the effects from that movie are still being felt in the film's world. After the Decepticon invasion of Chicago, the world has become more and more wary of Cybertronians, and the human Autobot joint military unit Nest has remained disbanded despite their heroic actions in Chicago. A CIA-backed military force known as Cemetery Wind now focuses on hunting down the remaining Decepticons, but that's only their official mission. Unofficially, Cemetery Wind hunts down any Cybertronian that happens to come into their crosshairs, be they Autobot or Decepticon. After coming under targeted attack, Optimus orders the remaining Autobots to go into hiding and they become separated. Leading the Cemetery Wind operations is Harold Attinger, who has teamed up with businessman Joshua Joyce to create an army of human-made Transformers. In order to accomplish this, they both agree to assist the intergalactic bounty hunter Lockdown to capture Optimus Prime. In return, he'll give them a device that can create raw metal by cyberforming organic material and serve as a seed for the beginning of a robotic society. The opening of the movie sets the stakes really well, giving us a look at a post-Chicago War Earth and the effect it's had on humanity overall. Like in Pirates 4, the continuing story feels natural and lines up with what's come before, even adding some interesting bits of lore to the story that in no way gets out of hand in the next movie. While the new additions to the world feel natural and a good continuation, the first third of the film has a much different feel than the previous 3 movies that came before, helping to give it its own identity. The first 2/3 of the film really subvert the Transformers movie formula, keeping the film smaller scale for the most part. While the MacGuffin of the movie is introduced in the opening moments of the film like previous installments, it's largely forgotten about and doesn't really become important again until the 3rd act. In some ways, the MacGuffin in this film feels like an excuse to bring our characters together and formulate character development rather than create action scenes. Now it does that too, but there's something refreshing about the all-important object taking a backseat to the characters for once in these movies as compared to something like Revenge of the Fallen that has no less than 3 separate MacGuffins. So while by the end of the movie it ends up being a little more like what we're used to, the first 2 acts being more of an on-the-run story helps things feel fresh while we get acquainted with our new characters. And speaking of characters, it's time to talk about our leads, which is one of the controversial parts of this movie and what makes my claim that this is arguably the best one of the 5 a little dubious. For our lead main character, we have Mark Wahlberg as Cade Yeager, an inventor from Texas. Yeah, I agree that's a little weird too. I know he's probably not exactly the right person for this role. Someone like Mark Ruffalo probably would have been better if he hadn't been busy with Marvel movies at the time, but for what it's worth, I think Cade Yeager works for the most part in this movie. Now, The Last Night is a totally different story and we'll discuss that another time, but I happen to like Wahlberg in this movie for the most part. While it may sometimes be a little hard to reconcile the obvious Boston accent with a guy who's supposed to be in the middle of Texas, I think he pulls off the overprotective father yet absent-minded professor vibe he's supposed to come off as. He gets a little aggressive at times, but that's something that's probably to be expected in a Michael Bay film, and it usually only happens when he's trying to defend his family, which is an important factor to his character. Cade loves his daughter Tessa a lot and wants the best for her, but can't often provide that. So when something happens outside of his control to disrupt what he envisions should be the perfect life for his daughter, he gets somewhat understandably upset. Threatening physical violence upon some poor randos being shown as property when the bank forecloses on it might be a little much, but I don't know, I feel like as time has gone on, maybe it's become a little more realistic. Who hasn't wasted the occasional few minutes watching a Karen compilation video on YouTube? Moving on to Tessa, she's not the worst. I think Nicola Peltz does a good job with the normal girl wants a normal life shtick and isn't anywhere near as bad as she was in Shyamalan's last Airbender movie. Part of what can make Tessa annoying is when she's with her boyfriend, Shane, played by Jack Rayner. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about Shane. He's a badly written character, and I of course have to mention the Romeo and Juliet law scene. I'm sure if you're familiar with this movie, then you've seen it mentioned 100 times already, so I'll be quick, but yeah, it's bad. Easily one of the worst scenes in the entire franchise. The fact that this scene even exists as an insult to the medium of film in general. Whose idea was it to include it? Not to mention when Shane pulls out the card with the law written on it, the statute he recites and the statute number on the card are totally different.
Statute 2705-3.
What? Texas statute? That a real law?
Yep.
So Shane is already an awful character by being included in this scene, but he's also a tale of two characters, as he spends half the movie being an annoying jerk and the other half being a whimpering coward that wants to impress Cade so he can keep dating Tessa. There is, however, an easy way to fix him, which the film unfortunately didn't do. He can have both the jerk and cowardly characteristics if part of his character was that he only acted tough around Tessa. I even think this is maybe what the film was trying to go for, as there's a few moments that are obviously supposed to be funny at Shane's expense, but just come off as aggravating. For instance, the infiltration of the night ship. The scene begins with Shane being rude to Cade, but then the moment they get inside, he does nothing but whine and complain. This concludes at the end of the sequence when they find Tessa and she thanks Shane for saving her even though Cade was the one who did all the work. This is obviously supposed to be funny, but it's not. It's just annoying. If while they were in the night ship, Cade and Shane had a conversation about his fluctuating attitudes and Shane admitted that he puts up a tough front because he's scared, then the two could have a bonding moment, and it would help recontextualize his earlier behavior in the movie. Instead, he stays an unlikable jerk throughout the entire thing and somehow manages to earn Cade's respect. While I think I understand what the movie was trying to go for, it unfortunately failed in that regard. But where the movie fails with Shane, it succeeds with Joshua Joyce, played by Stanley Tucci. Joshua starts out the film as an arrogant Steve Jobs type that cares only about his own glory and lining his pocketbook. As it goes on, he becomes more and more concerned with how his supposed creation is behaving, and after a call from Cade reminding him of his small-time roots, he decides to hesitate on his deal with Cemetery Wind and do the right thing. And boy oh boy is he a blast to watch. More than anyone, Stanley Tucci seems to be having a blast on the set and is hamming it up for the cameras. Once he makes that turn from antagonist to reluctant hero, he almost becomes the heart of the film, and I can't get enough of him.
Like a tactical nuke. LOL. That's funny. I can't, this is really happening. A man, me, who's worth over $20 billion, is now being chased by CIA assassins. That's the truth. And in the middle of a robot uprising. And I'm carrying what is in essence a tactical nuke. The great thing is, the great thing is that I'm barely feeling any jet lag.
And speaking of fun, we've got new Autobots to talk about. While Ratchet and Leadfoot both return from previous installments, they are unfortunately brutally killed off. With few Autobots remaining, those that are left seem to be those that are a little rough around the edges. John Goodman voices Hound, reinventing the classic G1 character into a boisterous commando with a heart of gold but an itchy trigger finger. While he can easily be compared to Ironhide from the first three films, Hound outclasses him in every way, spitting out one-liners left and right and mowing down his foes as he does so.
Stay behind me, I'm covering you. If I stop covering you, it means I'm dead. But that ain't gonna happen. Take that! I'm a wicked warrior robot. Damn! I'm like a fat ballerina who takes scalps and slits throats. Got your fortune cooking? Come here, little punk.
Crosshairs is next, voiced by veteran voice actor John DiMaggio. Being more of a renegade out for himself by all appearances, when push comes to shove, he ultimately charges into battle when ordered thanks to his fanboy allegiance to Optimus Prime.
You just want to die for the guy. That's leadership. Or brainwashing or something.
And finally, Ken Watanabe voices Drift, a samurai-inspired Autobot that has his own set of issues, preaching peace but being quick to use his giant swords to slice up anything in his way. Well, what else can you expect from a former Decepticon?
We must be quick. We have the element of surprise. Let's try to use violence as a last resort.
Get it!
Kill you! Kill you!
Yeah, hate those things. Freaky.
He's not alive anymore.
Bumblebee, of course, returns, but without a voice, he's still not much of a character, which leads us to the real heart and soul of the movie, Optimus Prime. This is the crux of my argument and why I love this movie so much. It only took them 4 tries, but at long last, a Transformers character is one of the leads in a Transformers movie. Amongst fans, this has been a long-standing complaint with the series. With this first movie, having the robots play second fiddle to the humans made sense, as it was a way to introduce the concept and characters to audiences by using Shia LaBeouf and others as an audience surrogate. In Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon, however, the robots continue to have minimal impact on the plot while the humans do most of the work. Optimus is dead for most of Revenge of the Fallen, and instead of him, we're subjected to Wheelie, Mudflap, and Skids as our primary robot characters, since Bumblebee still can't talk, and both returning and new Autobots are reduced to the sidelines. Dark of the Moon fares a little bit better, but not by much, as while Optimus is back, his screen time is still fairly small, given what's going on, and the humans do most of the investigating. Instead of really helping out directly, the Autobots mostly serve as chauffeurs as Sam and Agent Simmons investigate their Cold War conspiracies. Even during the Battle of Chicago, the Autobots tend to disappear for minutes on end as we get stuff like the admittedly cool scene of the driller tearing down a building, with the humans inside. So at long last in Age of Extinction, the Autobots are properly involved in the main action and have just as much to do as the humans. Certain characters like Bumblebee tend to randomly disappear for a bit so they can show up and save the day like usual, but at this point you kinda know what you're getting into with a Bay action sequence. And even more the center of the action is Optimus Prime himself, who actually gets a character arc in this one. Now, I know for a fact that this is another one of the controversial points for me to make, but I adore Optimus in this movie. Yes, he's not your classic G1 Optimus Prime, despite still being voiced by Peter Cullen, but I'd argue that as early as movie 2, we've known this isn't the same Optimus. While out of context, it might seem a little strange for a childhood icon like Optimus Prime to be ripping off faces and executing wounded foes, the Bayverse Optimus is a different version of the character, plain and simple, and that's okay in my book. I know that a lot of purists don't agree with me on this, and I respect that, but whether or not you agree with a certain interpretation of a character and how they're handled, it doesn't forever tarnish it. Not to wade into you-know-what territory, but Optimus isn't a Luke Skywalker character that there's only one version of him. Optimus Prime is a Batman, where there's lots of different versions of him existing simultaneously, and in most cases, what one version does usually doesn't have too much of an effect on what the other does. G1 Optimus is different from Movie Optimus, who is different from Armada Optimus, who is different from Beast Wars Optimus, who is different from Animated Optimus, who is different from Prime Optimus. They may all be different versions of the same character, and some of them might even be voiced by the same guy, but they're all free to grow and change in their own ways. And that's a good thing, isn't it? Without the ability to differentiate, the character as a whole can unfortunately remain stagnant and not change overall. Because while they might all be separate, each new version can then pick and choose the best attributes from each prior version moving forward and hopefully avoid some writing mistakes that previous versions make. I don't really see anyone complaining about the fact that Shattered Glass Optimus is evil. If your argument is, well, of course no one complains because that's an intentionally different version of the character, then what's wrong with writing Optimus a little differently in the movies? Optimus losing his faith in humanity in Age of Extinction doesn't affect my view of G1 Optimus or Animated Optimus at all because they're different versions. I think it's great that one of the feature films wanted to take a risk on such a popular character considering how many people go to watch these movies. If anything, I would expect they would have never tried doing something like this and instead would have strived to stick to G1 Optimus' personality as closely as possible so they could maintain their popular family-friendly character image. Debate on whether or not you think he was actually written well, but you have to give them at least props for trying something, right? The same can be said for the Netflix War for Cybertron trilogy. Overall, the writing in that show was pretty subpar, but I at least give them points for trying something with Optimus and his relationship with Megatron in the show. They had some good ideas, it's just that none of them were really properly executed on. The same can certainly be argued for Age of Extinction. While Optimus losing his faith in humanity certainly isn't on brand for a traditional Optimus Prime, it made sense for the Bayverse Optimus considering the 3 movies that came before. Not only is Optimus losing faith in humanity well set up, but visually the movie goes through a lot to remind you that this isn't your typical Optimus Prime. He starts out the film broken and beaten in a dusty, flat-nosed truck to symbolize the departure his character has taken from his G1 roots. When he upgrades to his new form at the end of the first act, his new look is drastically different from almost any Optimus that has come before. You can see that they took some design inspiration from Prime, but overall it's completely new and different. While I myself am not a big fan of this look for Optimus, it still does a good job reminding you that this isn't your typical Optimus Prime. While lines like,
Autobots, I have sworn to never kill humans. Big mistake. But when I find out who's behind this, he's going to die.
And
They slaughtered Ratchet! I'm gonna tear them apart!
are a little much even for me, Optimus is fascinating to watch as the Autobots and humans plan their infiltration of KSI. And what follows is easily one of the best scenes in the live-action franchise and why Age of Extinction is Peter Cullen's best performance as the character.
Hey! 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 Stop! That's company property!
They're not your property. They were my friends.
Oh, you ain't talking so much now. You got Hound in front of you, huh?
Go ahead.
Show us your true colors once and for all.
Just give me the word. I'll splatter him.
Why don't you tell Itchy Fingers here that this is all the spoils of war. Dead metal. Innovation. What we do here is science. Because if we don't do it, somebody else will. Because you cannot stop technology.
We're not your technology! Let me vaporize his ass.
I broke the code. I own your whole genome.
The world will know what you're doing here.
The world? The world will approve. We can make you now. Don't you get it? We don't need you anymore.
That was cruel. Autobots, we're done.
Cullen's delivery of Optimus's pain is done so well, and the writing of this scene is filled with lots of little subtleties that make it impossible to discard this movie as just another loud summer blockbuster. While some of Optimus's more anger-filled lines seem to indicate he's going to go on a murderous rampage, he's still Optimus Prime at Spark. Despite finding one of those responsible for hunting down his friends and killing them and being a more violent version of the character overall, he's not a sociopath like people like to joke about online. Despite being a different, more conflicted version of Optimus Prime, he is still Optimus Prime and doesn't kill just for the fun of it, or even for revenge. He kills to stop more killing, such as when he finished off both Megatron and Sentinel at the end of Dark of the Moon. Killing Joshua would not have stopped anything, and so Optimus decided to cut his losses and leave with the Autobots that he had left. He even stops Hound from blasting him, and when he does kill a human during the final fight, he doesn't do it out of revenge, he does it to save Cade's life. I don't even think Optimus knew exactly who Attinger was except bad guy about to kill my friend. So he acted and saved his life, the same way he would have taken out a Decepticon. Now, would G1 or animated Optimus have done this? Probably not, but they're also from universes that are, let's say, less intense than the Bayverse. So it's not as easy to do a one-to-one comparison. I doubt a human villain like Professor Princess is going to kill anyone. But one moment I love more than almost anything else in this movie is when Cade and Optimus talk on their way to China. Cade delivers the perfect line to not only sum up the situation, but the movie as a whole.
I'm asking you to do what I do. I'm asking you to look at all the junk and see the treasure.
Is Age of Extinction perfect? Far from it. It's too long and has a couple annoying characters. Some of the characters that aren't annoying aren't always the best written, and it clearly made some very controversial choices, but I love it all the same. Because amongst the junk, of which there is plenty, there's still treasure to be found. And I think Optimus Prime's story arc is the crown jewel sitting at the very top. I'm not even done, there's still plenty to talk about. For instance, Lockdown. Lockdown is by far the best villain out of all 5 movies. Megatron is continually undermined by being made a servant to someone, either obviously or retroactively in most of his appearances. The Fallen doesn't get much screen time to be really an effective villain, and while Sentinel Prime is good, he's got nothing on Lockdown. And I'll save the load of nonsense that is Quintessa for another day. Lockdown is probably one of the best characters in the live-action films, mainly because there's not too much different about him compared to his original counterpart from animated. And I know I just went on about how changing Prime's character is a good thing and we should embrace that kind of change, but Optimus has been a character for far longer than Lockdown has, so it's nice that they are able to give a relatively new character the spotlight he deserved. While unfortunately not voiced by Lance Henriksen, Mark Ryan does a great job as Lockdown, providing a fantastically threatening aura to the mercenary. Lockdown being a bounty hunter also gives him a unique angle compared to prior and future villains in the films. While he is working for someone else similar to Megatron in the movies 1 through 3 and 5, for him it's just a job. He might feel threatened by his employers, the mysterious creators, but he doesn't feel duty-bound to serve them out of loyalty. He's in it for the cash, and the fact that he obviously has some sort of gripe with Optimus and the group of knights he was a part of helps. The fact that Lockdown dislikes both factions of Autobots and Decepticons helps him stand out, and his general I don't care attitude he has throughout the film just makes him stand out as cool. If Boba Fett had a transforming car, you know it would be Lockdown. A lot of the action is also fun and different compared to most Transformers films. Aside from some bombing runs, there's never been a whole lot of aerial combat in the films, and so Age of Extinction dedicates an entire sequence to this as Crosshairs, Bumblebee, and the humans attempt to escape from the night ship. The battle in Hong Kong is also by far my favorite final set piece in the franchise. Between Hound spitting off one-liners and the epic Dinobot charge followed by Lockdown's giant magnet, there's a lot of fun to be had. I also think the Dinobots are really cool, and don't think it's a con that they weren't really utilized much in this film. Now, the next movie is another story, but they get their big moment at the end of this one, and it's pretty cool. Steve Jablonski's score is also really good, but, that's not a surprise. Lockdown's theme is great, the Dinobot Charge track is an all-time favorite, and most of the music is just really memorable and hummable to me in general. In all honesty, I could probably go on and on about this film for a long time, but some of the things I do love about this movie are some of the things that I hate about The Last Night. So if I'm going to talk about that movie, it needs more time dedicated to it in its own video, along with another 5th movie that came out in the summer of 2017. So until next time.